Okay.
Our mission, Helping Parents Heal, is a nonprofit organization dedicated to assisting bereaved parents. Through support and resources offered, we aspire to help individuals become shining light parents, meaning a shift from a state of emotional heaviness to one of hopefulness and greater peace of mind. Helping Parents Heal goes a step beyond other groups by allowing the open discussion of spiritual experiences and afterlife evidence in a non-dogmatic way. Helping Parents Heal affiliate groups welcome everyone, regardless of religious or non-religious background. Attendance at all of our meetings is voluntary. All discussions that take place at affiliate-led meetings are confidential. We hope that participants will learn from and share with each other. Zoom meetings run by leadership are not confidential. These meetings typically feature guest presenters and are posted on YouTube so that affiliate members worldwide can watch and benefit. Neither type of Helping Parents Heal meeting is designed to replace traditional therapy or spiritual counseling. Helping Parents Heal offers a wide variety of speakers, allowing parents to learn about many possible ways to heal. This includes presenters covering progressive topics such as afterlife evidence and connecting with our children who have passed. The views expressed by our guest speakers may or may not reflect the opinions of Helping Parents Heal leaders and members, so we ask that you take from their presentations whatever may benefit you personally. Welcome, everyone, and thank you, Rob, for being here.
Yes, thank you, Rob, for being here. And I will go ahead and read his short bio so you know a little bit more about him. Rob A. Gentile speaks about his incredibly profound personal experience. At the age of 56, Rob had a massive heart attack followed by a profound near-death experience. On his journey to heart transplant, he was close to death again and entered the ethereal a second time. He found himself inside a shapeless, formless vacuum of unending and infinite vastness. He was everywhere at once, scattered across a timeless expanse and connected to the wisdom of the universe, all of it without words. He saw and simultaneously became part of a gigantic interactive web of twinkling lights covering the earth and stretching into infinity. Curiously, some parts of the web were brighter, some dim, and some completely dark. He later came to believe that this web represents a network that binds all of us and is built on quarks, the smallest element of matter, which are made of light. While in the ethereal, he understood that each quark of light symbolized a life. He realized that if he hurt himself, he would hurt everything connected to him, but if he loved, the light would spread. Rob also saw his daughter with special needs perfect, whole, and radiant. In his book, Quarks of Light, Rob shares his journey and provides a roadmap for overcoming adversity, discovering your true identity, staying in spirit, and connecting to the universal language of love and light. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming Rob Gentile. Welcome, Rob. So glad that you're here.
Thank you so much, both of you, Elizabeth and Irene. Thanks so much for having me. It's an honor to be here and share my story. And before I get started, again, Elizabeth, I just want to thank you for sending me this book, because it really, I've made copious notes throughout, because it really resonated and strengthened my faith and the belief that all of us have. And now that I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that we're spiritual beings having a human experience, and that we just transition and live on in this beautiful glow of love and light. So I just want to take a moment to, because you'll understand this a little bit better as my story unfolds. In some of the meetings that I've spoken with at Helping Parents Heal, I thought it was beautiful. I wish that I can get to know every one of your loved ones by name. And I just like to take a moment and ask them to join us, because they are here, they're with us. That veil is so very thin. And you'll see that I always ask two very special people to join me on each side of me when I speak, and you'll get to know them as my story unfolds. So thank you again for having me. Let me start with, I'm originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I am in Charlotte, North Carolina now. But I've been down here. My wife and I have been married for about 30 years. We have one child, my daughter Maria, who has Rett syndrome, a very, very complicated and rare neurological disease. She's total care. She can't walk, talk, or feed herself. And she has a seizure disorder along with many other things. But curiously, it was about 6 years ago now, I had had some minor surgery on my neck to remove some bone spurs from sports injuries when I was younger. And it's a very, very simple surgery. They go in through the neck actually, and they move the esophagus aside and they drill out these bone spurs. You stay in the hospital for one night and your pain is removed. So I had that surgery done. And as fate would have it, about 4 nights later in my bed at about 11 o'clock at night, what my doctors know now is that I threw a blood clot. That blood clot went directly into my widowmaker and caused me to have a massive heart attack. Now, at about 11 o'clock at night, my wife hears these horrible screams and I'm thrashing around in bed. She has no idea what's going on because, like I said, perfectly healthy person, taking care of myself my whole life. And now I'm screaming in pain, flopping around in bed. She turns the lights on and I pass out from the pain. She calls a neighbor over to watch Maria. We call the ambulance and I'm whisked away. Thank God the ambulance, the hospital is only 3 miles from my house. So what's interesting is the ambulance driver knows I'm having a massive heart attack and they give me some blood thinners, some things right away. They get into the ER, they put me in a room and they give me some meds to calm me down. And it looked like for a moment there, I was stabilized. So the cardiologist was not in the hospital. They called the cardiologist and a nurse and my wife are in the room and she's calmed down now. Everything seems fine. And all of a sudden, what my wife says is kind of like, I talk about this in the book, a scene from the movie The Exorcist. I'm laying on the gurney, passed out, and suddenly, almost as if someone had grabbed my shirt and just pulled me up off the gurney with great force, I sprang forward from the waist up. My eyes popped wide open. I screamed out the name Frosty, and I fell backwards, collapsed on the gurney. Code blue rang out in the hospital, and in rushed a team of doctors. I had flatlined. So my wife, the doctor, who's now a very good friend of mine, a little Indian woman by the name of Dr. Patel, my wife grabs her and says, "We have a special needs child. She can't make it without him, and I cannot do this alone. You have to save my husband's life." She's escorted out of the room, and Dr. Patel and her team begin to work on me. They can't revive me. I was flatlined for 20 minutes. My medical records show a little bit longer. They tried everything. I had the sternal rubs. I had several paddle shocks. I had 4 shots of epinephrine into my heart. I could not be revived. It was curious that for some reason, Dr. Patel felt compelled to continue to work on me. This woman would not give up. And she should have called it a long time ago. Most doctors would have called it thinking I was already brain dead, but she continued to work on me until a slight pulse was obtained. And at that very moment, and the cardiologist arrived, he was able to fish a catheter up through my leg. He saw that the blockage, put 2 stents in my heart. Unfortunately, it was too late. I went into cardiogenic shock. I was intubated and I fell into a 4-day coma. Now, what's curious about this is that during those 4 days, my brother came down from Pittsburgh. I was actually raised Catholic. He called the local parish priest. The parish priest came on the 2nd day. They didn't think I was going to make it, anointed me with oil, gave me my rites. In the Catholic faith, it's called extreme unction. You only get it one time in a Catholic's life to prepare your soul to meet God. So I got my rites, and throughout the next couple of days, they sent neurologists in to see if I were brain dead. Now, I don't know how they do that. They didn't know if I were brain dead, but on the 4th day, they decided, they told my wife, we're going to have to take the tubes out. If he starts breathing on his own, we'll see what we have. So obviously I did. I began choking as they started to take the tubes out of me. And now here comes the rest of the story. So what's curious is that my wife, Melanie, was the first one when I came out of coma to come into my hospital room. And she approached my bed. She said, I was talking like a child. I had this high-pitched voice. And I told her, I said, you're not going to believe it. You're not going to believe it. It was your brother. It was Frosty. He came to me, spoke to me. And she said, oh my God, Rob, that makes total sense. I said, what do you mean that makes total sense? She said, right before you flatlined, you sprung forward on the gurney. And of course, I didn't even know I had a heart attack. I had no idea where I was. She said, you sprung forward on the gurney. You shouted out Frosty's name. That was his nickname. And you collapsed backward on the gurney. So to give you the backstory, 7 weeks prior to me dying that night, my brother-in-law, Frosty, had transitioned by suicide. And he was going through a divorce at the time. It was around the holidays. He was under a lot of pressure. He owns his own business. And he has a daughter in college. And he was living in the upstairs bedroom of his parents' house. And it was very, very early in the morning, about 5:30 in the morning, when I got the phone call. His mother called me, told me what happened, and asked me to come to the home and go upstairs and see if I could find a journal or a note or anything that would give them a clue as to why Frosty had done that. So I had made 7 separate trips upstairs to that bedroom. And finally, on the 7th time up, I was able to find a journal, which I gave to the family. On the second day coming out of coma, and by the way, my arms were completely paralyzed from a mini stroke that I had during coma. And I'm sitting there in my bed, and here comes this beautiful little Indian woman with these glistening brown eyes, who I now know is Dr. Patel. And she pulled a chair up and she sat next to me. Knowing my arms were paralyzed, she reached down and she put her hand on mine. And she began to tell me how happy she was to see me alive and all of the things that she did to try to save me and how many times she almost lost me. And it was just an incredible moment. But then all of a sudden, it got personal. And it was curious. She began talking about her father. And she said, you know, I had a very, very close relationship with my father, almost to the point where we can read one another's thoughts. And all he was living for was to see my first child. I was pregnant with my first child, and a few months before my child was born, my father died unexpectedly of an aneurysm. And she said, you know, ever since that time, I've been very, very bitter. I've lost my faith. I used to believe, and I used to have a strong faith. I'm Hindu, used to have a strong spiritual relationship. But she said, you know, just seeing you here alive, maybe, just maybe, there really is something more out there. And in that moment, something had been bothering me since I came out of coma, because I remembered Frosty very, very clearly speaking to me. And by the way, what Frosty said to me was, I've made a big mess out of things. I need you to go back and help clean things up, but tell my family I'm in a good place. And curiously, that was the moment that I had this huge paradigm shift in my belief system, because I was raised as a Catholic to think that something like that was, you were condemned. And I never believed that as a Catholic, and Catholics kept on changing the rules. You know, now they don't call it a mortal sin anymore. They've changed the rules up several times. And I'd always wondered, even as a child, how can a loving God say something like that or believe something like that? And that was the belief system at the time. But then I knew in that moment that none of that was true, and that my brother-in-law was in a good place, and he was so happy and at peace. In this life, he had an anxiety disorder, and there it just seemed like none of those demons seemed to bother him. He was free, he was at peace, surrounded by this love and light. And it was a beautiful moment. But I knew that something else was going on. Something had compelled Dr. Patel not to give up on me. And as she was talking about her father, all of a sudden, the puzzle unscrambled and everything came together. And as she was working on me, a male spirit had entered the room and kept on saying the same thing over and over again. Keep working on him. Don't give up. You can save him. Keep working on him. Don't give up. And it hit me that it was her father. And in that moment, I decided not to tell Dr. Patel because I would have thought that she, oh, he was on drugs or whatever, that she would have thought I was crazy. So I actually let it go. And I didn't tell her until a year later when I came back to the hospital with a dozen roses, met her in the cafeteria of the hospital and interviewed her for my book. That's when I told her. And it hit her. And now she knows that her father has always been with her. And he's always been right beside her, encouraging her to I'm so proud of her because she's a doctor, encouraging her to keep going. And now every year on his birthday, we make it a special occasion to talk and celebrate his birthday. So those two experiences before, I kind of believed that there was an afterlife, but I just, I wanted to make sure because it was kind of like an insurance policy, right? But then after those two experiences, I was just completely changed as a person and I understood the truth. So what was curious is after I got out of the hospital, or I should say before I left the hospital, they told me that my heart was destroyed and that I would need a heart transplant to survive. So I couldn't leave the hospital because my heart was so weak without two things. The first thing they did was they strapped me in this defibrillator vest, which looks like a policeman's bulletproof vest. And you have a battery pack strapped over your right shoulder. And every time my heart would get weak and stop for a second, this thing would shock me back to life. So talk about PTSD, because my heart was always going up. So I had this defibrillator vest on my chest, and I had this this battery on the right side. And then they put a port in my chest, dripping this medicine called milrinone on my heart every 30 seconds. So I had a pump in my left shoulder. So I came out of there and my doctor said, this milrinone, it'll pump your heart. But he said, the problem with it is it's like STP. It makes the heart pump, but it starts the clock ticking. So you're going to be running out of time pretty quickly. So you've got to find a place to get a heart transplant because they don't do them here. So I left the hospital. I looked kind of like this cyborg, science fiction creature, right? I'm going like this all the time because I'm being shocked back to life. You can hear this pump, putting this medicine on my heart. So I'm kind of walking around like this, and I couldn't find a heart anywhere. I couldn't get a heart in North Carolina. I went to Duke. I went to Sanger, all these famous places. I tried all over the country. I couldn't get a heart. Finally, my employer in Chicago happens to sit on the board of the University of Chicago Medicine. And it was my employer that actually helped me get into the University of Chicago Medicine to get on the transplant list. So my wife and I were on a plane, and this didn't happen until April. I've been walking around like this from January to April. And coincidentally, and by the way, I coined the phrase in my book that coincidences are God's way of remaining anonymous. And I believe that now with all of my being, because it was on April 20th that I was admitted to the University of Chicago Hospital to be put on the transplant list. And that just happened to be the day that my father passed away when I was 5 years old. Never knew my father. I've always wanted to have a relationship with my father. But it was my oldest brother that said, you've always wanted a relationship with your father. And it's no coincidence that on this day, you've gotten admitted to the University of Chicago to get a heart on the day that he passed. So I knew he was with me on my journey. So when I got to Chicago, of course, you have to go through the process of getting a transplant. In the meantime, I'm getting weaker and sicker and weaker and sicker. I'm 174 pounds. I had atrophy down to about 132 pounds. I was a bag of bones. As my oldest brother said, you look like a wizened old man with the voice of a child. And that's what I was. My wife actually was going back and forth because she has to stay home to take care of our special needs child. And she was coming to Chicago. And right before I got transplanted, she came back and told her best friend, I have to prepare myself. My husband's going to die. There's no way he's coming home. He's not going to make it. So while I was in Chicago, one of the things they did for me, there was a brilliant transplant surgeon that had created this thing called the New Pulse. It was an experimental pump that had only been used on cows. And he told me, he said, Rob, it's the only thing that we can do to keep you alive until your donor heart arrives. So they put this pump in me. I've made medical history with this pump called the New Pulse. And now it's being used across the country as a bridge to transplant. But they cut me here. They fished a little balloon pump down through my aorta, and then out my side was a titanium disc that connected to these wires. And the pump was about the size of a lunchbox, and it would pump my heart for me, in addition to the milrinone and everything else that I was on, in the hopes of keeping me alive until transplant. Now, unfortunately, something else had happened medically with me. I'm not going to get into those details right now. But long and short of it is they took me off the transplant list. So there I was about 132 pounds. My heart was constantly going into tachycardia. And after living with my daughter for 20 years, not ever sleeping through a night, she has a seizure disorder, taking care of her, now going through this, I had simply one night, a raging storm came. I was on the 8th floor of the hospital facing Lake Michigan. There's this raging storm that whipped up one night. This rain was smashing into the windows. And my heart went into tachycardia, and I simply released my spirit, knowing that I was going to die again. And this is where I had my most profound near-death experience. It was in that moment that I was taken up into a timeless place. And I call it in the book, into the ethereal. I call it the ethereal place. It's kind of like where that veil is pulled back for that millisecond. Who knows how long I was in that place? It was probably a second in time. I don't know. But all of a sudden, I found myself standing in the middle of nowhere in this vast expanse. And I didn't know, it was inexplicable. I didn't understand what was happening, because I can look down and see myself in my bed. My heart's in tachycardia. The alarm is going off. And I'm wizened away. I see the New Pulse pumping, trying to pump my heart, and all the IVs. I'm in this green hospital gown. And then I could see like a hologram of myself standing in the middle of nowhere. And it was almost as if I was made of sand, and someone just picked up the grains of my being and just threw me and scattered me across this infinite, timeless expanse. And I thought to myself, I'm everywhere at once. And all of a sudden, it seemed as though I understood how the universe worked without words. I know that I've read, after my experience, I read a few other NDE experiences, and I know that some people hear things and see angels and all these other things, but that wasn't my experience. My experience was the five senses had no functionality in that place. In other words, I couldn't smell anything. I couldn't really hear anything. I couldn't taste anything. But what I did see was that light had a whole different kind of experience there. I could see these colors, just incredible colors that I'd never seen here in the temporal world. They were everywhere in the ethereal. And I had this ability to see light, all these different shades of white light in a whole different manner. It was just incredible. And while I was standing there in the middle of nowhere, I remember being disappointed, being raised as a Christian. I didn't see Jesus. There were no angels to greet me. There were no relatives to greet me. It was just me. But then it's almost like the divine chose to express in concepts that I wholly understood in the moment. Concepts like what was impressed on my spirit. It was that communication in that place for me was like, it was like telepathy and synchronicity at the same time. If I wanted to know the question to any answer, all I had to do was think about it. All I had to do was observe, and I immediately knew the answer. So standing there, I felt these impressions come upon me, like, my power is omnipotent. This is the power back of all things. This is divine source. This is your real identity. And in that moment, I knew that I was not my body, my race, my religion. I became one with that whole entire space, that divine energy and love. And I thought to myself, wow, we make things so complicated here, but it's really quite simple. Everything comes from the same source. Everything is connected. It's almost as if everyone and everything, both animate and inanimate objects, are made of the same stuff. And it was an incredible knowing. And then what was so fascinating is I saw and became part of this gigantic interactive web made of twinkling lights. And when I was in that space, I realized that each one of these tiny lights was a life. And I'll tell you, the best way that I can describe this web is that it looked like it was made of trillions and trillions of neurons. And we all remember what a neuron looks like from science class. It has a nucleus, and then it has these tentacles that weave into one another. And it was like it created this beautiful tapestry of twinkling lights that seemed to stretch into infinity and bind us all. And in that moment, I knew that we were all connected, that we were all one. And I thought when I was in that place, if I love, the light will spread and it will illuminate the path for others. And that's what it did. When I had those feelings of love, I could see the rest of the web that I was connected with try to light, and that light became brighter and brighter when I had those thoughts and feelings. And it was a message of unity and oneness. And it was there that it was impressed upon me that each one of those little lights that I saw was a quark. And quarks, I researched for the book, I realized that quarks are the smallest building blocks of matter. And at the subatomic level, just like us, they're made of light. And then I realized that this is what the Creator uses to create, because quarks combine to create infinite possibilities in the universe. They can become a tree, a dog, or a person. It doesn't matter. So we're all made of the same stuff. We all come from that one divine intelligence, that one divine source. And there, from that experience, when I became one and part of everything, I then looked down and I had this experience of seeing a life review of the nurses coming in and out of the hospital room, taking care of patients. And what was the most curious part of that experience is that I only saw the nurses that I was making negative assumptions about. And almost as if I was watching multiple television screens, I began to see their lives in a regression of events. In other words, who they are today was they were going backwards in time. And the best way that I can describe this is, it's kind of like we all know how cartoons were made. Each stage of the character is penciled, each stage of the development. And then, the old timey cartoons, they would flip those pages at high speed and it would create movement. Well, it was kind of like how I was seeing their lives in a regression of events. And every time there was a watershed event in that person's life, like abuse, a terrible accident, personal choices that probably weren't the best for them, circumstances out of their control, whatever those things were, it was creating a portrait for me of who that person had become. And when it was over, when that movie was over, I thought to myself, how could I have ever judged these people so harshly? And then I had a life review of myself. And boy, was that tough. Because in my own life, I had prayed many times that God would take Maria. And I had to carry that burden around silently, very personally and silently my whole life, instead of seeing my daughter suffer. And my wife and I have done everything for my daughter. We've given up everything. We've taken her all over the world for a cure. But yet I wanted to see her suffering end. And I had to forgive myself for that in that moment. And when I forgave myself, it was the most tremendously freeing experience that I ever had. I felt free and unburdened for the first time in my life. And what I think is curious about that is that when I forgave myself, my daughter Maria came to me in that ethereal space. There she was, standing in the middle of nowhere. And she was perfect and whole. And I looked at her in that unspoken language of the ethereal, and I said to her, Maria, I don't know what to do for you anymore. We've taken you everywhere. We've tried to find a cure. I don't know what to do for you anymore. When you're suffering, tell me what it is that I can do. And in that unspoken language of the ethereal, she said 3 words that transformed my life. She said to me, just love me. And when she said, just love me, I cried out into that vastness that I never want to leave this place. And when I said I never want to leave this place, I found myself back in my bed. And I was so angry. I wanted to be back there. I wanted to be with my daughter where she was perfect and whole, where I was connected to everything and everyone, where I knew that I was loved. And I wanted to be in that warm, loving light of God. But yet, in my bed, I realized that my daughter is there. She's perfect. She's whole. And in that moment, I really didn't care whether I got a heart or not. I was free for the first time in my life. And that's what I want to share with you tonight. I want you to know that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, and that our loved ones, just like Dr. Patel's father and Frosty and my daughter Maria, are there perfect and whole and happy in that space. So if you don't mind, Elizabeth, I'm going to take a quick sip of water, and if anyone has any questions, we can take those, or we can move on to the next phase of my journey, which was my donor heart arrived shortly after I had that experience.
Thank you. Well, go ahead and get some. Oh, you have water with you, which is good. I have questions myself. I don't know if other people have questions in the chat box. And if you have anything that you've been wanting to ask Rob, go ahead and ask us right now. There are people who are saying, wow, I'm just loving this. Thank you. Helen is saying, so beautiful, Rob. Thank you for sharing. It is a beautiful story. And let's see, Diana is saying he's already answering my questions. Just so touching and beautiful, Iris is saying. So maybe we can just continue for the second part and then see about the questions at the end, if that's okay with you. Would that be okay?
That's fine. That's
Okay.
fine with me.
Wonderful, but you're doing a great job. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for your comments. I really appreciate that. Well, what happened then is that shortly after that, my donor heart arrived and I was transplanted. And curiously, another one of those so-called coincidences, my mother had passed about 7 or 8 years before my transplant. And she died at home in my oldest brother's home. And it was myself and my oldest brother, and then my other brother, who was at the foot of her bed. And it was about 2:35 in the morning. And we were all taking turns giving her a drop of morphine, as hospice told us to do, to keep her calm as she was passing. So we had her rosary there and a candle, and my brothers had fallen asleep. And it was me who put that last drop of morphine under her tongue, and then she passed. Curiously, my heart was put into my body at the same time that my mother passed. So when I came out of transplant, it's kind of a funny story. I came, you have like 4 days in recovery where you're heavily sedated, then you start to come out. And the first thing that hit me was my body was in this rocking motion, like rocking a child, and I was actually holding on. I was actually holding on to the rails of my bed because this thump, 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 thump was so powerful. And this heart was consuming my entire being. And I never forget, there's a doctor, and his last name is so long, even the nurses just call him Dr. O, the mysterious Dr. O. And Dr. O is the one that goes and in the middle of the night to get the heart and brings it back. So Dr. O was the first one that I saw when I was conscious, and I had this experience of this heart just beating like crazy. And I said, Dr. O, this heart is consuming my body. What is it that you put inside me? And he just looked at me. He's got this real dry sense of humor, straight face. And he said, well, we put a jaguar heart in you, kid. And he winked and walked out of the room. Me, I'm so naive, I'm asking the nurse, give me my cell phone. I want to Google, is it possible to put a jaguar heart in a human being? But that's how powerful the heartbeat was. And this went on for a couple of days until my surgeon came in, and I wanted to know who they put in me. Well, the process of getting a heart is that you have to wait 1 year before you write a letter in your own handwriting anonymously you write it actually to the organ transplant center. Mine was Gift of Hope in Chicago. Then you have to write a letter, and if the family responds, that's fine. If they don't, then you keep writing letters in hopes that they do. Well, finally, after 2 years, my donor father responded. And it was a marvelous experience. I got to meet the donor father, and we met at a Denny's restaurant. And one of the most moving parts of that whole experience was that when we sat down, he brought a computer with him, and he brought photos of my donor. And I was shocked to find out that my donor is a beautiful, blue-eyed, blonde-haired girl named Molly. And Molly was born 3 months before my daughter Maria. So Molly and Maria were the same age when I got transplanted. And Molly had transitioned by suicide as well. But what was curious about Molly is that she had an affinity for special needs children. She always wanted to work with special needs children. And the more the father told me about these so-called coincidences, the more I realized that Molly was meant to live inside me. And it's actually Molly who has been forcing me out, wanting me to do more and more of these talks, because it's very difficult to articulate what it feels like to have the essence of another spiritual being living inside you, because particularly the first couple of years, my feelings were not my own. My tastes in food changed, music. It's an incredible experience. And Molly also, curiously, the dad started opening up these files. She had never taken an art lesson in her life, but yet she was a natural artist. And she loved to do pencil sketches. And when he opened that file up, I broke into tears because Molly's artwork was identical to my mother's. My mother, who was an Italian immigrant, also was a natural born artist who never took a lesson. And a lot of the same pictures they drew. And the tone of the pencils and the way she expressed emotions was exactly the way my mother drew her pencil art and expressed emotions. Then the real kicker is that Molly loved daisies, and she actually had a daisy. It was one stem with 3 daisies tattooed on her shoulder before she transitioned. And she did a black and white picture of that daisy, and I guess gave to the tattoo artist. So curiously, the daisy was my father's favorite flower. And although I never knew my father, there are these iconic photos of him in Pennsylvania, kneeling behind a big row of daisies, because we planted a big garden. He planted a big garden every year in Pennsylvania, and the daisy was his favorite flower. There are many other coincidences, so-called coincidences, about Molly being the one who decided to live on through me. So the science of this, and this is all the research that I did for my book, which is, I think, some of the most fascinating things that I've ever encountered in my life, besides my NDE, is that what people don't know is that the heart has a brain. And that's what makes heart transplant work. It's not the other way around. So the heart, of course, is the first thing that forms in the mother's womb, because it's the heart that pumps the blood to the brain and oxygen and everything else, so the rest of the being can grow. So the heart is the one that initially sends the messages to the brain. And they have found a cluster of cells that they've identified as the brain of the heart. And that's where a lot of our feelings and emotions are stored. A lot of our tastes in music and food and all of these things, they're actually stored in the heart. So when someone cuts your birth heart out of your chest, like they did me, and put someone else's heart, that brain has to find ways to communicate with this brain. Because when your heart is taken out, your parasympathetic nervous system, all of that stuff comes out with it. So it has to start sending signals to your brain to make this thing work, and it builds new pathways to your brain. So a lot of the people that got transplanted on my floor, and my surgeon, who's Dr. Juvenandan, who's transplanted over 1,600 people, including his own wife, would tell me incredible stories about some of the transplants that he's done over the years. I mean, just fascinating stories about, he had a UPS driver, big burly guy that was a UPS driver for 30 years. He transplanted him. And 2 years later, he came into the University of Chicago and said, I want my papers transferred to this hospital in New Mexico. And he said, why? He said, because I want to be a chef. And lo and behold, he never knew who his donor was. Dr. Juvenandan looked up the files, and sure enough, his donor heart was a master chef. So these things are scientifically proven now. And to me, now I understand that, why should we even doubt something like that when we're spiritual beings having a human experience? And the other fascinating scientific part of this is that the heart actually is the most powerful force of electromagnetic energy in the body. So they can measure that now. The heart communicates with the brain in 4 ways. It communicates neurologically, it communicates biochemically, it communicates through what are called pulse waves, and it communicates through electromagnetic energy. So this electromagnetic energy, what they've discovered, is probably where our aura comes from, because the heart, that electromagnetic energy can be detected up to 3 feet in diameter from our bodies. So when someone walks in the room and we say, oh, I can feel that person's energy, that's the heart communicating with you. That's how animals communicate with human beings. It's the heart muscle communicating through these electromagnetic waves. They've done incredible experiments, putting a couple in the room and having them stare at each other for a number of minutes. And they have equipment on them. And within a very short period of time, their hearts are actually beating in a perfect synchronized rhythm. Now, what's important about this And what I want to really drive home is that the other studies that they did about how music and attitude and emotions affect the heart, which also affect how we are showing up in the world, is incredible. In other words, they have found that feelings like anger and hatred and um, let's call it just unkind thoughts toward another, judgment, things like that, they produce a very erratic heart rate. And the heart rate, when it's erratic, it sends the central nervous system into chaos. And that's where nervousness and anxiety comes from. But when we have thoughts of love and kindness and appreciation and joy, and we listen to music that lends itself to that, the heart goes into what's called a perfect 10-beat Meyer wave. And the Meyer wave is when our bodies are perfectly synchronized and operating at their optimum. And I find it very interesting that the Ave Maria, composed by Franz Schulze in the early 1800s, it hits that 10-beat Meyer wave perfectly when we listen to it. So that's the power of music, and that's the power of the heart. So when we think about having loving, joyful thoughts, we're actually creating that quark of light inside all of us to shine brighter, and we're illuminating the path for ourselves and others that are near us. And that's how we change the world. So
That's
I want you.
beautiful. Oh my goodness. And I just want to say that the fact that Molly inspired you to speak out about this experience is so beautiful, not just for me, but for all of us, because we all have our kids we have kids in spirit, and many of us have kids who have donated organs as well. So this is so beautiful to hear. I have a question in the chat box. Diana is saying, so do you think that Molly was your mom incarnate? Is that something that you linked together? I know she's talking about the drawings that they both did similarly. What do you think about that?
No one's ever asked me that question, and I think it's a great one. It's a great one to contemplate. I don't know about that. I'll have to meditate and pray about that. But here's what I do know. I believe that, and this could be another 2-hour discussion when we get into purpose and things like that. But I really believe that Molly was meant to live inside me. It might have been the reason why she came here in the first place. So this message could be expressed so I can come back and help care for my daughter. But for some reason, in that web that links us throughout eternity, and we're all connected, and we're never lonely. Loneliness is an illusion. How can we ever be lonely if we're connected to everything? So just wanted to throw that out there.
That's
But I believe that Molly was destined to be inside of me.
I love that. I think that that's very beautiful. Janine is saying, and this is something that we talk about a lot. There's a theory that only a portion of each of our souls is in our body on Earth. I mean, I know that I spend time with my kids over on the other side at night when I go to sleep. I think that we all feel that way as well. And we wake up and we don't necessarily remember, but that we've spent time with them. I love the idea of being with my child right now, despite that I'm not aware of it. And I wonder if that was your impression when you encountered your daughter in the ethereal. Was that something that you also were feeling, that she's here and she's there at the same time?
Oh yes. See, and here's how I want to make this this analogy really drive it home. What I've learned is that, so I'm going to take my daughter for example. Now she's been through some horrible treatments. We went through years and years and years of, the only way we could stop her seizures was to rush her to the hospital, put a phenobarbital IV in her, and actually put her in a coma. That was the only way we could stop it. So for years on end, we lived like that. I mean, it was every 6 weeks we were living in the hospital. And every time we would go through something like that, Maria would always have this little smirk on her face. And when I saw her in that ethereal space with that smirk, I knew that that was the message she's been trying to send me this whole time, dummy. And I never got it. That even though she was going through all this pain and suffering here in the temporal world, in the physical body, that she was perfect and whole in spirit. And now that's what gets me through a day. When we have a tough day, I know that she has that smirk on her face, and I know what she's trying to tell me. So this is where I'm going to take it one step further. What I have learned is that love is the link between the physical world and the spiritual world. And the way we really get this to manifest in what love really looks like in the physical world is by serving others. Because when we serve others, it's almost like the hand of God is reaching halfway down. And when we serve others, it's almost like we've made that connection. Because I've learned from my experience that, hands that serve are holier than lips that pray. I used to get my back up when people would come to me and they'd see Maria suffering and they'd come to my home, and it was never, what can we do for you? It's like, I'll pray for you. Well, I really need you to help me change this diaper right now. I'll take the prayers, but help me out here. So I think that this is where, at least for me, in my experience, I've learned that it's through serving others that love spreads and that light inside us spreads. And I'm telling you, I'm convinced that all of life begins with that spark of light, and then we go back to that light. As a matter of fact, in April of 2016, you can look it up, in Northwestern University, researchers discovered that when a human egg is fertilized, there is a bright flash of light that takes place. They call it the zinc spark. They discovered the zinc spark in animals, but they had never had the technology to see the zinc spark in a human being. So actually, we come into the world as a flash of light, and they actually are able to tell how well that egg is going to develop by how bright the light is. Think about that for a second. So we come into the world as a flash of light, and we go back to that light when we transition.
That's so beautiful, Rob. And I just want to tell you some of the things that people are saying. Melissa is saying, "Oh, bless your beautiful being. You have confirmed everything I questioned in life. Please continue sharing your story." Kathy is saying, "Oh, that helps so much for all of us moms who have seen our children suffer while here on earth," which is the whole story about your daughter being over there and being able to see her healthy and whole, and at the same time she's here. So this is very, very helpful for all of us who have had children who have suffered while they've been here. And then also Melissa is saying, "Yes, I agree. It is all about love, being in service to others. Nothing brings me more joy." So it's true. I mean, being able to reach a hand back and pull someone forward, and that's actually a huge part of helping parents heal, because we have parents who volunteer to help other parents move forward. And we always believe that by helping someone else, it helps us even more than it helps that person. So I think that you are exactly right, that we're all here to love each other and to help each other and to help each other move forward. But the fact that now with these transplants and things like that, we're even more interconnected, obviously. I mean, this whole world that we're living in right now is so interconnected, and it is all about love. We have one other question. I have a question here that I was interested in hearing what you think. Christy is saying, within 3 months of my son passing, my heart just started stopping several times a day. I was only 42, and I'm not sure if Christy still has any issues, but do you think that that is related to her son passing?
Did you have a heart condition before?
I would assume that she didn't, but let's see. Christy, could you tell us a little bit more about this? Is this something that you experienced before your son passed, or is it something, and I'm not sure if Christy is available to speak. Let's see. I'm just looking. Doesn't look like she's answering.
Okay, that's okay. You know, because here's what I've learned about grieving and grief, and I've done a lot of it. So it could be that she was just grieving so hard that, you know, the heart, like I said, the heart can go into tachycardia. The heart can get out of rhythm very easily when we go through traumatic experiences like that. And, you know, sometimes our grief equals how much we've loved that person, how deeply we've loved that person. And sometimes that's hard to break through that. And it doesn't surprise me that she had this physical manifestation of her heart probably didn't stop, but maybe either a palpitation, or if it did stop, maybe it skipped a beat. And sometimes it could feel like that. But maybe it was related to that, I would think.
Possibly. And we have someone else saying in the chat box, broken heart syndrome, which is something that I think a lot of us know
Oh yeah,
a lot about when we have a
very,
child.
very real.
Debbie is asking, she said that the movie Return to Me is all about a lady with a heart transplant, and it sounds similar to your experience. Have you heard of that movie?
No, but I'm going to write it down and check it out. Return to Me.
Yes. So that's good to know. And we have maybe one more minute. Would you like to maybe wrap it up and tell people about where they can find your book, and maybe other things that are coming up in the future where you're going to be speaking? That would be wonderful.
Oh, sure. So you could find my book. It's on Amazon. You can see actually some of my podcasts. You can find out more about me at robagentile.com. That's my website, robagentile.com. I'll be speaking with Suzanne Geisman on, I think it's October 19th. I have some other speaking opportunities coming up, some more podcasts, and I announce all of those on my website at robagentile.com. And like I said, you could buy the book on Amazon, or all the booksellers actually carry it. So would love to, and actually I would love to hear your comments. You can post your comments on my website through my contact page, but would love to hear from you.
We'll also be posting this on YouTube. So if people would like to post comments on the YouTube video, we will send it to you as well if you'd like to post this video as well. And I just put down that you're with Suzanne on the 19th. What time is that interview? Do you know?
Yes, give me 1 second to look at this daytime here.
I believe it's in the afternoon that she usually does.
It is, yes, it's at 4 o'clock Eastern on the 19th.
4 p.m. Eastern. So that's good to know. And everybody loves listening to Suzanne as well. So thank you so much for being with us. And we always ask.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. It's wonderful.
Unmute and say thank you and good evening. So if you all would like to do so, please do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ron. That was wonderful.
Good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
so much.
Thank you,
That was
Rob.
great.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Beautiful.